Welcome back to Police Academy Prep. This is Deputy Z. Today we'll be going through the Law Enforcement Basic Recruit Book of the Police Academy, going into Chapter 2, Communication. This will be an in-depth recording version where I read from the entire chapter and provide insight to potential test questions and real-life situations. Now, before we jump into the material, just a quick reminder, make sure in the description of this video you click the link to check out the practice exams that I have just released. These practice exams will be solid, prepare you for the upcoming chapter test, and I also have a mix of questions in there, scenario-based, to help you prepare for the state officer certification exam. So definitely give that a check in the description. All you gotta do is click the link. It'll take you about 10 seconds to create an account, and then you'll see all the available tests and practice tests to take on the spot. Let's go ahead and jump into the material here. So this is communication methods. You'll learn several communication skills that will make you safer and more effective in your work as a law enforcement officer. Officers who possess strong interpersonal skills can respond appropriately and potentially avoid triggering or escalating a crisis situation. Communication, test question here obviously, involves the exchange of verbal and nonverbal messages. Communication methods include spoken or written language, gestures, facial expressions, and body movements. For communication to occur, know this, the speaker must send their message in a way that the listener will understand. Then the listener can show that they understand by responding. Characteristics of an effective communicator. Law enforcement officers interact with people of many backgrounds, cultures, religions, beliefs, and ethnicities. You should be able to adapt your communication style to fit the needs of the people who are interacting with and the situation at hand. Communication barriers, unclear expression, or a failure to understand the other person's needs can all lead to miscommunication. Test question there. What can lead to miscommunication? Communication barriers, unclear expressions, or a failure to understand. When miscommunication occurs, it can create problems and potential safety issues for officers. So what can create problems and potential safety issues? Miscommunication. Good communication skills can prevent misunderstandings and the escalation of tensions, thereby keeping you and the community you serve safe. You can become a more effective communicator by practicing empathy, courtesy, and professionalism. So, test question, by practicing empathy, courtesy, and professionalism, you can what? Become a more effective communicator. Empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand and care about the emotions of others. Think of it as a tactic you can use to help in the situations you encounter as a law enforcement officer. So remember, empathy is a tactic. That will be a test question. And empathy is also the ability to understand and care about others. Empathy should not be confused with sympathy, which is a feeling sad for someone. So again, sympathy is just feeling sad for somebody. That is not empathy. That will be a test question. They'll try to trip you up on those. Empathy is understanding and caring, not just feeling sad. All right, officers can use empathy in any setting to help keep situations safe. For example, you may respond to a call about a person loitering in front of a store. Use empathy to navigate the situation. Consider that this person might be fearful of the police and unsure of the situation. Think back to times when you were afraid or felt unsafe, and use these experiences to let this person know that you understand how afraid they might be. Using empathy to put yourself in another person's shoes will also help you employ the 4 pillars of procedural justice. What will help you employ the 4 pillars? Using empathy and putting yourself in another person's shoes. I saw that as a test question. If you were in the same situation, you would want to be listened to, treated with respect and fairness, and know what was going on. These behaviors may seem basic, but in a stressful or volatile encounter, empathy can mean the difference between escalating into violence or keeping everyone safe and secure. So what can mean the difference between escalating or keeping everyone safe? Empathy. Now we move into courtesy. Courtesy is how you display professional conduct or show respect for others. The following tips may help you demonstrate courtesy as an officer. So these following tips, just kind of know them loosely. You could probably see them on the test. So here are some tips to be courtesy. Be professional, yet personal, by introducing yourself by name and using the person's name to establish rapport. Treat every person you meet with dignity and respect. Avoid word, phrases, and sarcastic tones that may create barriers. An example is the word obviously, when the situation may not be obvious to someone else. Another expression to avoid is the phrase you people, which establishes an instant separation between you and the people that you're addressing. When a person's request seems unrealistic, instead of focusing on what cannot be done, redirect the focus to what can be done, and then explain what actions you are taking and why. Maintaining a professional, courteous demeanor will help you understand appropriately to situations and can make the public more likely to assist you. So again, maintaining a professional, courteous demeanor will what? Help you respond appropriately to situations and make the public more likely to assist you. Now we move into professionalism. Know the definition here. Professionalism is behavior that demonstrates good character and is marked by pride in yourself and your career. The characteristics, know these, of a professional include service, integrity, respect, quality, fairness, honesty, courage, compassion, moral and ethical leadership, trustworthiness, and common sense. Here are some examples of professionalism. I would say you don't need to memorize them, just kind of have read through them. Doing the right thing when no one is looking, knowing your job and being competent, dressing professionally, maintaining a calm presence, recognizing and admitting your mistakes, being courteous, practicing customer service, maintaining your training, and continuing education. Be mindful of your attitude and assume one that supports the professional behavior you should display every time you go to work. Your attitude shapes your expectations of what will happen in any given situation, and it affects how people perceive you. An officer with a professional and positive attitude is a valuable member of society and the law enforcement community. Another way to maintain professional behavior is to practice the 4 pillars of procedural justice and the lead framework. Remember, I just talked about these in chapter 1, that you're going to see these in chapter 2. So another way to maintain this professional behavior is procedural justice and the lead framework. Again, the lead framework is listen, explain, equity, and dignity. And yes, you will probably see these questions on the test. So just refresh yourself if you need to go back to chapter 1 to what those are, and make sure you know them. Remembering the lead framework will give you guidelines to follow and make it easier to remain professional in a variety of situations. So this test will probably have a question like that. It'll say, what will give you guidelines to follow and make it easier to remain professional, and that'll be the lead framework. Projecting a positive self-image. An officer's most valuable nonverbal tool is their command presence. All right, they're going to ask this question in the test, and you need to know this. So an officer's most valuable tool is what? Command presence. But if you go back to empathy, think of it as a tactic. So the question might say, which of the below is a tactic a law enforcement officer will use in a situation? And the option might be empathy, it might be professionalism, it might be courtesy, it might be command presence, and you're going to be confused because they're all kind of similar. But just remember, if you see the word tool, it's command presence. If you see tactic, it's empathy, because that will be a question they will try to trip you up there. So to have command presence, you must demonstrate confidence in your demeanor by maintaining a professional personal appearance, erect posture, alertness, and attention to your surroundings. Continual training, education, and experience are all things that will improve your self-confidence, credibility, and command presence. That last sentence there is a possible test question. Displaying a positive self-image extends to every role you play as a law enforcement officer and will vary depending on which role you are serving at the moment. The supporter, stabilizer, or enforcer. And here we are again from chapter 1. We're building on them. For instance, when acting as a supporter, maintain your command presence, but adjust it to fit the situation. Consider sitting down with the victim instead of standing over them. In this way, you are still in control of the situation and conveying ability, but also making the victim feel more comfortable. Being aware of what role you need to take on will help you determine a suitable professional response for that situation. Now, before I get too far in finishing this chapter, and unfortunately I forgot to say this at the beginning, but hey, if you follow through and you listen to my videos, you're going to get this tip that other people might not if they skip ahead. So with this chapter, it's a smaller chapter, very small compared to chapter 1, very small compared to chapter 3, and etc. With these small styled chapters, the tests end up being harder because they don't reduce the amount of questions. It's still 50 questions or maybe 100 depending on whatever your academy does. But instead of maybe, let's just say chapter 1, I forget, but it's approximately, let's just say 40 pages, and then chapter 2 is maybe 15, 20 pages. With a big chapter, they're going to really only pick the important stuff. On a small chapter, they're going to have to basically pull questions out of thin air in order to have enough questions. So you really have to read in between the lines with a lot of this stuff. It might not be a definition word. You might have to actually look and dig, right? So one example here is continued training, education, experience are all things which would improve your self-confidence, credibility, and command presence. You might not think that to be a test question just reading it through really quickly your first time, but I've gone through it so I can point it out, and I've seen that as a test question, right? So every paragraph you read, that first sentence and that last sentence, big chance one or both will be a test question. And then also, obviously, in the middle of the paragraph, don't forget if you see something important. But just keep that in mind with this chapter. I've seen people fail this chapter, even though it is small. It's easy, is because they learned from chapter 1, the test was all just bullet points and bolded topics and definitions. And then when they got to chapter 2, it was a lot more like almost scenario based. It was sentence based. It wasn't just definition, and they got caught. And I've seen people fail this. So you don't want to start off failures. I don't want to make you nervous, but just keep that in mind when either listening to me or reading your own chapter, that you actually read and know this material. And obviously that will play over into the state exam as well. So let's jump back into this here. Project a positive self-image in your physical appearance. It is the first nonverbal message you give upon arriving to a scene. That is a test question there. So what is the first nonverbal message? Your physical appearance. Keep your uniform clean and pressed and your shoes shined. Maintain your personal hygiene. This demonstrates respect for your job and the people in your community. All right, we're moving into verbal and nonverbal communication. The more you understand verbal and nonverbal cues, the greater your ability to communicate and choose responses appropriately. Constantly evaluating your verbal and nonverbal communication, as well as the verbal and nonverbal communication of the people you are interacting with, is important to your job and safety. For example, you may observe that a person's verbal communication, what they're saying with their words during a traffic stop, seems unemotional, but their nonverbal communication seems aggressive. Nonverbal communication is any message or signal sent from one person to another without the explicit use of language. So know those. Know what verbal is, know what nonverbal is. Some communication cues can include a voice and tone, general appearance and dress, posture, body movement, facial expressions, touch, smell, personal space, and eye contact. And we're going to go into all of those right now. So you're going to need to know them. I would know them inside and out. They all will be on the test. All right, voice and tone. Verbal communication is not just what we say, but how we say it. Pay attention to how you speak and be mindful of your volume, your tone, and your inflection. Ask yourself and anyone else in the conversation these questions. What is the tone, volume, and pitch of the speaker? Does the speaker's tone of voice indicate sarcasm, confidence, compassion, anger, or another emotion? What words are being used and how are they spoken? All right, general appearance and dress. We have 4 things under there. You have posture, body movement, facial expressions, and touch. All right, so posture. Posture is how we carry ourselves. It can be an important nonverbal communication. Posture refers to the way we sit, walk, and stand, and includes our bearing, subtle movements, and general presence. When evaluating someone's posture, consider the following. When you ask someone about their timeline on the date of a crime, does the person shift their weight or suddenly cross their arms? Does someone's nonverbal communication match what they are saying to you? Does the person's posture help validate or contradict what they say? Body movement. Body movement can offer vital nonverbal cues. We often use our bodies to communicate our attitude on our emotional state by facing or leaning towards a person or moving away from a person. Consider the following. When you interview someone, what is your body language saying? Do you lean forward to indicate interest? Does the person you are talking to exhibit physical indicators, including rocking back and forth, twitching their eyes, or shaking their legs? Do know for the test that these behaviors could indicate that the person is nervous and is trying to self-loathe, or could be indicators of fight or flight. Facial expressions. We are able to express various emotions through our facial expressions without saying a word. The good thing is that most facial expressions are universal. For example, the facial expressions for sorrow, joy, surprise, rage, disgust, and terror are all the same across most cultures. When communicating with others, listen attentively and ask yourself, what facial expression is this person making, and does it provide additional information? Does the person's facial expression match the verbal message they are sending? A person may tell you that they are fine, but their facial expression may be one of rage. So I have seen on the test where one of these descriptors at the bottom, so they'll ask, so the question will say, what facial expressions is this person making, and does it provide additional information? Which of the below represents that? And then the option will say posture, body movement, touch, facial expressions. And you'll have to know that that was facial expressions. I mean, thankfully, it said facial expressions in the thing, right? So you'll know. But for example, when you interview someone, what is your body language saying? Do you lean forward to indicate interest? What is that an example of? Is that posture? Sounds kind of like posture, right? Well, we're talking about body language, but no, it's body movement. So just, you kind of have to learn these inside and out. There will be a bunch of questions on the test with just these. All right, touch. Nonverbal behavior regarding touch also depends on the person. You may find yourself having to touch people to perform your duties. For example, when consoling a victim, you may give a reassuring pat on the shoulder to show empathy, or you may have to physically redirect someone to a particular location. Think about what messages you are giving to others when you touch them, and make sure to always respect someone's boundaries if they seem uncomfortable or don't want to be touched. Smell. Sense of smell can sometimes be a barrier to communication. Know that for the test. Which of the below can be a barrier to communication? Smell. For example, some people may not share your expectations of personal hygiene, may have a medical condition, or may have dietary restrictions that can cause them to smell differently. Avoid making judgments about the people with whom you interact. Personal space. Boundaries vary greatly from person to person. While it may be acceptable in some cultures to move into close proximity to communicate, it may not be in others. Be mindful that when you move within someone's personal space, you may make them uncomfortable and limit your ability to communicate with them. All right, eye contact, a little bit of a longer one here. Your ability to establish, maintain, and understand eye contact will enhance your ability to communicate effectively. Factors such as cultural background, personality, nervous tension, emotional state, and medical conditions can influence someone's eye contact. Use your knowledge of eye contact to help determine someone's emotional state. Two concepts that you should be aware of are mutual gaze and break of gaze. Obviously, you are going to need to know these for the test. So mutual gaze and break of gaze. Mutual gaze is the common level of eye-to-eye contact that two people have when conversing. So think of mutual gaze is just kind of normal. You're talking to somebody, you're looking at them, etc. It usually starts when someone is trying to get someone else's attention. For example, as an officer interviewing a subject who appears hesitant to reveal information, you might establish mutual gaze by nodding your head and maintaining eye contact to encourage a subject to continue to talk. A break of gaze usually occurs when a person unintentionally or intentionally drops their gaze from the person looking at them. This could be caused by personality, emotional state, traumatic event, cultural norms, or recalling information. If a person breaks their gaze, it may indicate any number of emotions or nonverbal messages. Do not be quick to assume that you can understand their response if they are not making eye contact with you. Effectively evaluating your verbal and nonverbal communication will prove useful when you have to conduct criminal investigations, interviews, traffic stops, and interrogations. As a general rule, evaluate verbal and nonverbal behaviors within the entire context of what is going on and take cultural factors into consideration. All communication is subject to misinterpretation because people may react differently in stressful situations. That I can see as a test question. All communication is subject to misinterpretation, no matter how good of a communicator you are. All right, we get to some challenges to effective communication. Anticipating potential conflict will help you prepare for any law enforcement duty. There are many verbal and nonverbal cues to be mindful of as situations unfold, but there are strategies for conflict management that can be tailored to your duties. Each situation is unique and should be approached with patience and empathy. There are some common verbal and nonverbal barriers that you should try to avoid when communicating. There's going to be a list here. I would recommend maybe not memorizing word for word, but don't just glance over this. You actually need to know these for the most part. So, because they're going to ask you which of the below are some nonverbal barriers. They're going to say which one is a nonverbal barrier. Or they'll say this, and they'll say, is this a nonverbal barrier? So expect multiple questions from this. So again, these are verbal and nonverbal barriers. Failing to explain your actions. Failing to listen to what the person has to say. Using dialect, slang, words that have multiple meanings or different languages. Using curse words or slurs. Phrasing your message in a disrespectful way. Having prejudices or implicit biases that lead to false assumptions or stereotyping. Changing body language or tone abruptly. Using nonverbal communication that does not match your verbal communication. Or using derogatory hand gestures or body movements. It is so that's a list. So now we're moving on. It is important to avoid barriers to effective communication, but you should be especially mindful of these barriers when a person has physical or psychological disabilities or conditions. For example, speaking louder for someone who may be hard of hearing. A person has a language difference or an accent. Environmental and situational distractions are present, such as background noise in a person's home, like a crying child or a loud radio. There are several ways to prevent common barriers to communication. So I just went through my list of common verbal and nonverbal barriers. Now we're going through a list to prevent common barriers. So these are going to be confusing on the test. I've seen a lot of people trip up on these. The list I went through previously are the barriers. The list I'm going through now are ways to prevent those barriers. Okay, so treat everyone with respect. Maintain appropriate eye contact so that you can read nonverbal cues. Keep sentences brief and to the point. Short sentences minimize distractions, especially in stressful, confusing, or noisy situations. Give clear, specific directions. For example, saying stand next to the trunk of your car is better than saying move over to where I can see you. Use open-ended questions to promote communication without limiting the other person's responses to short or one-word answers. Avoid asking yes or no questions. Allow the person to give their side of the story. Understand that there will be times when communication barriers will be beyond your control. However, using communication strategies may help reduce the frequency of these occurrences. All right, managing conflict. Officers frequently serve as mediators during a conflict, and conflict resolution is a part of either temporarily or permanently resolving a situation before it escalates. Properly managing conflict can increase that awareness and understanding of the people involved and help them accept a decision of outcome. Common calls for service may often involve you mediating between juveniles and their parents or caregivers. The following conflict resolution strategies may be used for both adults and juveniles by tailoring your approach to each individual situation. Separating people involved, rendering first aid if needed, gather information from all sides. When appropriate, explain what you're doing and when. Provide options and available resources. If possible, help mediate a compromise. Tell the people involved why you are or not taking action. Act with dignity and leave people with their dignity intact. Before you begin mediating, you will also need to determine if the conflict can be resolved or only managed. Know the resources available to manage the conflict and bring it to an appropriate conclusion. Establishing order by guiding the people involved in the dispute towards a peaceful end should be the main goal. However, keep in mind that not everyone may agree with the solution. That sentence right there is a possible test question. To manage conflicts effectively, you should employ active listening, understanding human and cultural diversity, and practice self-control. You will learn about active listening later in this chapter. It is equally important to be well informed of the law and your authority, as well as how to appropriately apply both to a situation. You should remain unbiased and calm when helping people with a dispute. Many situations have the potential to escalate to violence if not properly managed. Some examples are domestic disputes, child custody exchanges, and landlord-tenant disagreements and civil disputes. Those are what? Many situations that have potential to escalate to violence. Know that for the test. If the situation escalates to violence, you must take steps to establish control, such as by calling additional personnel, redeploying resources, issuing strong verbal commands, or using physical force or the threat of force. These actions are commonly referred to as de-escalation techniques and are designed to bring a volatile situation under control. So know what de-escalation techniques are and those techniques that I just listed. Remember that until you establish control, mediation and arbitration cannot take place. However, with the use of de-escalation techniques, you may regain or reestablish control of the situation so that you can manage or resolve the conflict. Unfortunately, not all conflicts can be brought to a peaceful conclusion. Sometimes you may need to take enforcement action, such as making an arrest. Know the limits of your skills, the law, and your authority, and how to apply these to a situation appropriately. All right, moving on here. Professional communication and community expectations. As an officer, it is important to become familiar with the community and its expectations. Community refers to the people and locations that make up the neighborhoods, institutions, and businesses in the area where you work. That is a test question. What does community refer to? It is the people and locations that make up the neighborhoods, institutions, and businesses in the area where you work. Officers interact with and serve their communities every day, and how they behave can potentially harm or improve the relationship between the community and law enforcement. The community expects officers to behave in a courteous, efficient, and accessible manner, treating all people fairly with consideration and compassion. When officers act professionally, they build trust and strengthen law enforcement relationships with the community, and the community is more secure and protected from criminal elements. This is why displaying professional behavior when interacting with the community is as important as demonstrating proficiency with firearms or defensive tactics. On the other hand, behaving unprofessionally will have an adverse effect on how the community views law enforcement and can impact everyone's safety. People sometimes form negative opinions of law enforcement based on how law enforcement has previously responded to calls for service in their communities. An officer's unprofessional reaction to a situation can destroy the goodwill that took years to build within a community. Surveys show that people will most likely complain about your behavior if you show disrespect or arrogance, humiliate people, or rush to judgment on situations before gathering all the facts. Communities also complain about officers who make assumptions and respond in inappropriate and biased manners. Make sure to always demonstrate what? Professionalism in your interactions. Possible test question. Demonstrating professionalism will help improve your communications with the general public and the community and make you more capable of carrying out your duties. Possible test question there as well. Remember that you need the community's respect, support, and cooperation to provide effective law enforcement services. All right, now we're going to talk about demographics in the community. During the course of your duties as an officer, you will meet people from different countries and cultural groups, and you will communicate with people from various social, economic backgrounds, ages, physical abilities, religious beliefs, living situations, sexual orientations, political beliefs, and ideologies. People from these groups may feel fear or distrust or be uncomfortable when interacting with you. They may not understand how the criminal justice system works or they may have had negative experiences with law enforcement in the past. To improve your communication with diverse communities, learn the demographics and social characteristics of your community and demonstrate a sincere willingness to learn about those you serve. So like I just said, that might be a test question. As you see, that's not a definition word. It's not a bolded topic. It's kind of like a long run-on sentence. That is a possible test question. Just keep that in mind with this chapter and kind of lock in and focus on that. All right, let's jump back in here. Learn about the belief systems of different cultures and make an effort to connect with community members. Recognize differences that may block your communication, as well as similarities that may support your effectiveness. Ask yourself questions such as, does my gender affect the situation? Is there a family or a cultural hierarchy that I should be aware of? Is there a language barrier? And if so, what can I do to communicate more effectively? Recall the tips regarding nonverbal cues that were presented earlier in this chapter. Be aware of how eye contact, gestures, personal space, and facial expressions can affect your communication with diverse communities. Building rapport, respecting others, and taking the time to explain your actions can help you gain cooperation and lessen negative consequences. As the people you serve become used to how you police the community, they will begin to understand how local law enforcement agencies can partner with the community to prevent crime. All right, intercultural communication. Culture is one of the many factors that affect communication. Possible test question. Culture may be identified as the customary beliefs, social norms, and significant traits prevalent among a group of people or in a particular place. Also test question. It is important to understand the concept of intercultural communication and how it can affect your job as an officer. Know what intercultural communication is for the test. It will be on there. Intercultural communication takes place when people from different cultures communicate. Intercultural can mean interethnic, interreligious, and interregional, as well as between genders. When intercultural communication is done poorly, it can result in miscommunication and division between you and your community. For example, some cultures prefer to establish rapport or an informal relationship before conducting business. If you attempt to question someone from a culture like this without first establishing rapport, the person might be less inclined to share information with you. All right, another definition word here. When you are culturally responsive, you are open to learning about new cultures, are respectful of cultural differences, and recognize the important role that culture plays in people's lives. You can improve your intercultural communication by being culturally responsive, and you can work on being culturally responsive by doing what? 1. Learning about your community's diverse populations, faith organizations, languages spoken, cultural organizations, small businesses. 2. Demonstrating respect for the cultures of your community's members by knowing that culture is an important part of everyone's lives and identities. Showing respect for someone's culture can help make community members feel valued. Showing respect for other people's culture also leads to a better relationship between law enforcement and the community they serve. 3. Being open to learning and fixing mistakes when they happen. If a community member corrects an error you have made regarding their culture, listen and accept responsibility, and do not be defensive. Recognize that making mistakes is part of the learning process. What is important is that you're willing to learn and grow. If you are not sure, ask. If you ask a question about someone's culture in a respectful manner, you open up a dialogue that can result in a relationship built on a foundation of respect. 4. Remembering that not everyone has the same experiences as you. Everyone sees the world in a different way because each person's experiences are unique. Take the time to talk to your community members and learn their perspectives. You will need to dedicate time to build awareness and learn how to be culturally responsive. This will take some effort, but it will make you more effective as an officer. All right, preparing for an interaction. There are several techniques that you can help mentally prepare you for the possible interactions you may have while on your way to a call or before a conversation. Some rely on self-talk and some employ self-awareness. All right, you're going to need to know both of those. Self-talk is the practice of talking to yourself as you anticipate, encounter, or evaluate an event. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Know the examples, though. Examples include recalling skills and information learned during training, applying agency policies and procedures, and visualizing a professional response. Visualizing the conversation, test question here, can help you remain objective in a difficult situation by keeping your thoughts, verbal and nonverbal communications, and emotional responses in check while you assess a situation and complete tasks. While being aware of your own perceptions, assumptions, and limitations, you must also be aware that others have perceptions and assumptions of you. To communicate effectively, you must control your emotions and not allow them to dictate your words or actions. Remain open-minded, self-aware, and sincerely listen to the speaker without imposing cultural biases and values on the speaker. Focus on things you have in common to resist thinking about the other person in a stereotypical or derogatory terms. Be the calming presence and do not allow your anger to escalate a situation. Hostility and rudeness have no place in an officer's relationship with the community. When on the receiving end of profanity or name calling, remind yourself that those individuals are attacking the profession and not you personally. So focus on their behavior rather than their language. If, for example, you have told a person to stop smoking in a public park, the person may become disgruntled and use profanity towards you. However, if they do as you have asked and put out their cigarette, that behavior matters more than what they're saying to you. I'm going to say, for the sake of real world aspect, that is definitely important right there. You tell someone to do something and they actually do it, even if they're yelling, screaming, cussing you out, being dumb. At the end of the day, if they did what you needed them to do, then they did what you needed to do. You did your job. That's all you're looking for a lot of the times. Let them say their thing, let them do their thing, let them walk off cussing you out, and just move on. A lot of people get jammed up because they're like, oh, well, what'd you say to me? And then now that person starts saying stuff, you're saying stuff back. Next thing you know, it's an argument. The person wants to touch you. Now you get in a fight. And they're going to go back to that body camera and say, what do you mean? He was walking away. He did exactly what you said. Why did you rejoin in? And at the end of the day, you're going to get in trouble. The use of force might have been justified because you had battery Leo. But they're going to pull it way back and say, hey, sure, you're justified to use force. And yeah, that person went to jail. But you know what? You're going to get disciplined on this and that. So real world aspect, keep that in mind. All right, let's get into some core competencies. Every officer should demonstrate the following 10 core communication competencies while performing their duties. These competencies will help you communicate and may also help you avoid volatile situations. All right, all 10 will be on the test, 100%. These 10 are going to conclude our video here, but it's going to take a minute. I'm going to try to break them down as much as I can. We'll go from there. So the first core competency is introduction. The simple act of introducing yourself to a person and explaining the reason for your interaction may make a person feel more at ease. That's it for the first one. And that one explains itself. It has the word introducing in it, so you'll know right off the bat that's introductions. That's easy. We won't cover that one. Appropriate questions. Asking the right questions can also make the communication process smoother. In Chapter 4, you will learn more about the best questions to ask depending on the situation. All right, so appropriate questions. That is the second one, but that's piece of cake. It's asking the right questions. This is probably going to be one of the hardest ones. Active listening. Active listening skills are critical for law enforcement officers. Active listening involves, there's a list of a bunch here, paraphrasing or restating the information the person provides based on your understanding of what they have said so that the person may want to continue to give you information. For example, okay, so far I understood you to say, etc., etc. All right, next one is summarizing or repeating several of other major points to check understanding. For example, let me sum up what you said to make sure I understand everything correctly. And unfortunately, you are going to need to know these inside active. You're going to need to know paraphrasing. You're going to need to know summarizing. So all these points under active listening are also going to be questions themselves. So keep that in mind. So you'll know that paraphrasing and summarizing are part of active listening, but paraphrasing and summarizing are differently. So again, paraphrasing is restating the information, and summarizing is going over the major points to check understanding. So that's how you determine those two, because summarizing and paraphrasing are very close to each other. So highly recommend you go over those multiple times and know the difference and find the keywords that you know the difference are. So again, paraphrasing, restating the information, and summarizing is repeating the major points to check understanding. All right, so for example, summarizing, let me sum up what you said to make sure I understand everything correctly. Then we have clarifying. That's also very similar to summarizing and paraphrasing, but you do need to know the difference. Clarifying, or asking the person to explain or to repeat a part of the discussion that seemed unclear or that you did not hear. So an example is, would you mind repeating that last statement, please? Now we have reflecting. Reflecting is stating the information in a way that allows the person speaking to know that you will not only understand what they said, but that you also recognize their feelings and emotions. When using reflection during a non-confrontational conversation, you should try to match the person's tone and body language to encourage the person to continue speaking. It does not mean that you agree with what they have said, but that you have given them the courtesy of listening to them and have tried to understand how they feel. Then the last one here is ensuring that you allow adequate time for the person to both comprehend what you have said and be able to respond to you. Show them that you have heard and understood their response. So this is the third one under core competencies, active listening. All right. Just know under active listening, you have paraphrasing, summarizing, clarifying, reflecting, and adequate time. Active listening involves focusing more on listening than talking. Know that for the test. Listen so that you can gather important information such as who, what, when, where, why, and how. And listening will help you communicate better when you need to speak. All right, now we have self-de-escalation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, self-de-escalation. This is the fifth one. Self-de-escalation. If you find yourself becoming angry or emotional, take time to pause and reset your response. This process may include withdrawing from a conversation or having a fellow officer relieve you. As a law enforcement officer, you may meet people who react negatively to your authority. Remember that this is not an attack on you as a person, but their reaction to law enforcement in general. Self-control will help you stay emotionally strong even under considerable stress. What will help you stay emotionally strong? Self-control. Know that for the test. Self-control is under self-de-escalation. Self-control includes your ability to detach from your personal feelings in a stressful situation or encounter. You should understand what triggers your emotions and learn ways to manage them. If you cannot manage your emotional triggers, you may put your safety and health at risk. Knowing and overcoming your weaknesses will help you gain self-control. When presented with a stressful situation, breathe smooth, deep, and evenly. Be aware of things that irritate you. Exercise self-control. Keep a professional attitude. Maintain an impartial outlook. And precisely execute your duties to help retain your self-control. When an officer loses self-control, the situation can escalate quickly and have a negative result. Your goal is to have a positive result. So that is self-de-escalation, which includes self-control. Now we have nonverbal communication. Understanding the subtle differences between a person's spoken words and their nonverbal communication will improve your ability to communicate effectively. So what's going to improve your ability to communicate effectively? Knowing the subtle differences between a person's spoken words and their nonverbal communication. One of the things that makes communication so powerful is not only what is expressed, but how it is expressed. Ways you can use nonverbal communication effectively include indicating direction in a situation where it's too loud for verbal communication alone, emphasizing commands such as pointing in different directions to separate arguing parties, complementing a verbal message such as nodding to confirm the direction you have pointed a motorist to go, confirming an action such as nodding your head to indicate to the other person that you are listening, and substituting for a verbal message, for example, by extending your arm and holding your hand out to indicate that the person needs to stop. All right, then we got another one here. Environment and audience consideration. You must treat everyone with dignity and respect, so be mindful with whom and where you are speaking and remain empathetic and culturally sensitive. For example, if somebody does not speak your language or is hearing impaired, be patient and attempt to provide that person with an interpreter. So an example of this being a test question, what they'll say is, the question will read, you must treat everyone with dignity and respect, so be mindful with whom and where you are speaking and remain empathetic and culturally sensitive. So the question will say, having read that, which of the 10 core competencies is that? And that will be environment and audience consideration. All right, implicit bias. Always take a moment to assess what implicit biases might influence a given situation. That one's pretty easy. Then we have self-awareness. All right, self-awareness. Being aware of your own thoughts and behaviors can help you control yourself in a difficult situation. Recall that in Chapter 1, we discussed how self-awareness ties into your overall emotional intelligence. As you improve your emotional intelligence, you become aware of how you might react in a variety of situations. Having this awareness contributes to your overall safety because you will know how to prepare for the situation you will encounter. All right, the ninth one is procedural justice. Procedural justice can be helpful in fostering relationships with community members, including procedural justice in your communications with the public means explaining your actions, giving the other person a chance to speak, treating people with respect, and remaining transparent in your actions. And last but not least, appropriate conclusion. At the end of an interaction with a person, whether law enforcement action is taken or not, conclude by explaining your actions and what actions will or will not be taken and why. As explained earlier, treat every person with respect and leave them with their dignity intact. So conclusion is pretty easy. As soon as they mention, being done or leaving or explaining your actions, that's appropriate conclusion for the test. So that concludes Chapter 2. Like I said at the beginning, go to the description, check out my links so you can take the practice test to see how you're managing this information. Take the small one, see how you did. Take the large test once you're ready to really see how you're doing and kind of gauge that on how you're going to do on your exam coming up. Good luck, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.